Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in data about Kagurabachi, chapter number 80. This chapter is titled Secret Room. Dun 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 dun, it's a secret room, whoa, it's so crazy and insane. And you know what else is insane? This is chapter number 80, 8-0 of Kagurabachi. I don't know if that's just like weird to you guys also, if it's just weird to me as the one sitting here talking about this series, but I legitimately cannot believe that I started reading this series over 80 weeks ago, because of course, like, Shonen Jump's had a few break weeks here and there. We had the Sojo chapter or whatever, like 68.7 or 6, or no, it was 67.1 or 68.1. I forget whichever one of those two it was, but it is absolutely insane. This series is already at chapter number 80. It feels like almost like just like a week ago where I started these chapter reviews at chapter number 40 something after a whole Rakuzachi arc and all of the stuff there, and it's also insane. It's been 40 chapters since, like, Kiora went through, unsheathed the Masumi Enchanted Blade, and, like, let out the Centipede Butterfly and all those other crazy powers of the Shinichi Blade. Like, so much has happened in this series in 40 chapters, and it is absolutely insane to think about, right? But also, what else is insane to think about is just this chapter in general. This is such a lore-heavy chapter, along with just being such an awesome chapter, really just focusing on everybody in. If you're a Kagurabachi fan, your favorite character is Hakuri. I do not care who you are or what you're doing. If you do not love this boy, something is deeply wrong with you, right? And this is just like Hakuri chapter through and through. And really, what an amazing one it is at that. And really, with all of that being said, I just want to sit down and talk about this good old chapter of Kagurabachi. So hey, that's what we're going to do. But of course, we need to talk about what happened last time in Kagurabachi. And very simply put, it was a big chapter really focusing on, like, hey, here is Izami fighting off the threats in the threat elimination ground, right? There was a lot of, like, exposition and, like, just looking into, like, who some of these people that Teshaku brought with them. Of course, we met the Shigyu brothers last time. I will never have to say their names again because the Shigyu brothers were out of the Kagurabachi story, let's just put it that way, by the end of last chapter. And pretty much we just saw Izami do all of his stuff. We don't even know what his sorcery technique is. We just know that, like, the way he fights is called assault and battery. That's just how he does it, right? And then the big reveal is like, oh, hey, look at this. The Hashaku member that seems to be with the Shigyu brothers seems to be one of the three, that, or one of the four, including Yura, that was there whenever, of course, the Rokuhira hideout in the mountains was raided 3 years ago. And the whole end of last chapter was Izami pretty much thinking, like, hey, if there is one rule to the Kabanagi and the threat elimination grounds, it is that the threat dies here. And I honestly thought that we would be hopping back in to seeing what was going on with Izami in this chapter. Of course, I figured, like, we were going to be doing one of those things where we cut to Hakuri and Kudo every so often throughout, like, the next few chapters. But no, we legitimately start off this chapter with Hakuri and Kudo, and we do not go back. But to start off this chapter of Kagurabachi, we see that both Kudo and Hakuri are in the Kamunagi headquarters, underground level 2. So presumably a level under where all of the battling is currently going on the threat elimination grounds. It also makes me very interested to how many levels there are of the Kamunagi headquarters in general, of, like, how deep down does this place go, you know? But pretty much, we see that Hakuri and Kudo are walking through a massive library. And Hakuri even's like, whoa, what is this? Like, there are books for days around here, right? And Kudo just explains, like, hey, they're all manuals of sorcery. And not the kind of sorcery that's just innate to a person at birth. Basic teleportation and force field magic are more academic sorceries that you can learn, pretty much, right? And this place is jam-packed with formulas and knowledge for all of those pieces of sorcery, pretty much, right? And I also just love the note that Kudo just is like, hey, I mean, you were part of the Sazanami clan, weren't you? I mean, they're a prestigious lineage. Didn't you have a library like this at your place, right? And Hakuri pretty much, like, just says, like, I mean, we did have a library in our pretty much home, but it was not on this level. And he even points out, like, hey, the Samanami clan's library was really only half the size of the Kabanagi one here, pretty much, right? And Kudo even says, like, hey, you really gotta study to excel in the Kamunabi, right? And he's like, hey, you bet the Masumi, right, Hakuri? And Kudo just is like, well, those guys in the Masumi are masters of these crafts. If you absorbed and mastered all the material on this floor, you'd be there here. And we see that Hakuri has a really funny reaction to this, where he's just like, oh no, like, he almost looks like he's getting ready to puke from all of this information that's being thrust on him, pretty much, right? And Kudo even says, like, oh, are you not, like, really big on studying, pretty much, right? And we even see that Hakuri just thinks, like, whoa, that small kid, of course, talking about Ro, is like, he was really that badass. I think it's a really funny image that we get here, right? But Hakuri then just asks, like, hey, what is also that crazy racket we're hearing in the background? And Kudo immediately just says, like, oh, it's probably Azami brawling it out, right? And Hakuri's like, brawling? Like, what do you mean by this, right? Like, it sounds like they're getting ready to bust through the ceiling. Like, do we need to be getting out of here? But Kudo explains, like, hey, don't sweat it. There is a force field. There are 7 practitioners on par with the Masumi, but varied in areas of expertise. They trade off occupying our core station where they operate the force field. Though, if someone tries to bust through it, not only is it really strong to begin with, but they're also constantly repairing this, right? It's absolutely impenetrable, right? But Kudo says, but there is just a small issue of it does let sounds through. With this whole idea of, like, okay, I like where we're going. Like, of course, the sensory and force field guy who we got introduced to, 2 chapters ago? It's a little weird to think about. We have been in this sort of raid on the Kamunabi HQ for a little while now, right? But I do like this visual we get where, of course, we saw that pool of water, which, of course, is, like, spiking for, like, any disturbances in the force field, and the guy who's sort of sitting on a floating pillow with, like, a massive lantern almost hooked up to his brain, pretty much. We see he's sitting there, and we also just see a collection of, what is this, 6? Yeah, 6 other sorcerers sitting around him, because, of course, as we saw Kudo say, there are currently 7 different people who sort of rotate out on this job. So it makes sense that we see the other 3 pretty much just sitting down here all around here. And of course, I guess taking turns whenever they need to, right? And also the whole idea of, like, hey, they're on the same level as the Masumi. They've read all of these books. They know all about this force field and detection magic and all of this. So of course, we know that the Masumi know a lot of things on, like, making seals, healing, and of course drawing those mandalas that lead to teleportation, right? Which also leads us into this whole idea is, like, okay, then does that mean that the teleportation sorcery that Shiba uses, is that his innate sorcery, or can anybody learn that sorcery? It's one of these interesting things, like, okay, how does that particularly work here in a moment? And if you guys don't know, I've recently been on a brand new podcast, which it's pretty funny being that the arc we are in right now, but it's called the Kabunabi Headquarters Podcast. I'll leave a link down to it in the description box down below, but it's a new podcast hosted by me and a few other Kagurabachi YouTubers and just people who enjoy this series pretty much, right? And we were recently talking, and in one of our first episodes, it was just a few of us. It wasn't all of the members on there, but it was just a few of us talking about, like, the first few arcs of the series, and we had a long discussion on what Shiba's sorcery may be, and really a lot of the other people there were saying that they think it has to do something of, like, space-time or gravity almost, which would make sense, like, okay, maybe that's just, like, a facet of Shiba's abilities, right? Because, of course, I sort of want to believe that, like, okay, like, we know that Hirohiko's old sorcery was the whole blood crane, like, the paper cranes and all of that various stuff, right? But the whole idea is, like, can he use multiple abilities with that? Like, is it like an Enchanted Blade where, like, hey, Hakuri can use Iso, but maybe he can modify that Iso to do something else, right? Like, does one sorcery only have one ability, or can the sorcery have multiple different abilities, right? On top of what you can also learn through all of these books like the Masumi have, right? A lot of just interesting things going on here, which really leads me to, again, that question of, what is Shiba's sorcery? Does it have to have teleportation, or did he just learn that because he's ex-Kabanagi? Like, it's one of those things that I have no clue on whatsoever, right? But going back to all of the stuff that Kudo was saying, right? The whole idea of, like, hey, the barrier does let sound through, though. And Hakuri just says, like, yeah, but the sound is just getting louder and louder and louder. Like, I don't know if I really like this, right? As we see, Kudo just says, like, oh, that's probably because Ichiki probably joined the fight. And Hakuri's like, okay, who is Ichiki, right? And we learn that this is the short, old guy of the Kabanagi. This is the guy that we have seen so many times. He had that conversation with Sombra. We have just seen this character plenty of times, and it's awesome that we finally have the name of Ichiki. That's pretty awesome. If you guys don't know the translation of this name, it's really funny because sort of, again, in the Kabanagi headquarters group chat that we were all talking about this earlier, and the whole idea is like, oh, I was like, okay, Ichi, I know what Ichi means. Ichi means one. I know how that works. If you guys are keeping up with Shonen Jump, there's currently a series running called Ichi the Witch, as because Ichi is the first male witch, and his name literally means one. Pretty cool, right? And of course, I was like, Ki, okay, I know in like anime and manga, Ki is often like referred to with like some spirit energy or some power of some kind. So I'm like, oh, is he just like the first power or something? And then I got told that the Ki, at least the kanji for it, means demon. So first demon, yeah, I don't know how I really feel about this guy here in the moment, right? It's this whole idea of like, yeah, he's pretty strong, but it's also really awesome, like, he's now joined the fight to help Izami, and I really hope that we cut back to that soon and see how this battle between, of course, one of the main Hishaku members and Ichiki is going, along with Izami, right? I think it's going to be really cool to see whenever we get back to it, right? And we even see that Hakuri's like, whoa, like, that little dude fights too, right? And, like, he seems all teeny and ancient. Of course, we know this is the guy who trained both Shiba and Izami a long, long time ago, so, like, we all knew this guy was super, super powerful, right? But Kudo pretty much explains, like, hey, all of the upper echelon are highly skilled, though Izami is on a whole nother level. As for me, I'm not much of a fighter, which is pretty interesting that, like, I guess the one non-combatant is the one who's also helping Hakuri move around here, even though to make a little bit more sense of like the Shaku are also coming after Hakuri once they learn he's here, if you have a powerful member with him, but I mean, it's just one of those weird things, right? But we also just see that Kudo just continues saying like, hey, still most of the members of the council are up in their age, right? The ones fighting right now are probably our best bet, and each of them directly commands their own elite troop. As we just get a few images of a bunch of various sorcerers in the Kamunabi, right? And really, we just see a bunch of, like, unnamed people, like, I'm not even going to describe their appearances, because it's, like, we will hopefully be getting names for some of these people at some point, right? But we just see a few sorcerers. We see particularly a girl with glasses who's holding a sword, right? But also, most importantly, we see two characters who we actually know who they are. We see Ikuto Hagiwara and Hajime Kugara. And this is very interesting, of course. We knew that Ikuto Hagiwara and Hajime both worked under Izami. Of course, they were part of the counter Cloud Gouger special forces, pretty much, right? And of course, we knew that like Kazani was part of that. There was a few other people, and the only two people who we thought survived were Ikuto and Kazane, right? And we were like, oh, well, Kazani's not really in any fighting shape anymore. He lost like a bunch of limbs, and like he's never going to have a bright future. But we knew Ikuto was alive, right? But we thought that Hajime Kugara was dead. But we see at least his mask here in the background, and it sort of like seems like this like small spirit thing, like the main body of Hajime is not as big as it once was, which also leads me to a post I saw on Twitter this morning. I do not remember who said it. I am really, really sorry. I should have screenshot it because I honestly forgot this happened until I read it and I started scrolling through it. And of course, the typical Twitter thing happened where I like start to go like, I click on the wrong thing and I try to reload it and the tweet is gone. So I am super sorry to whoever did this tweet out there. If you're watching this right now, or if you know who put this post on Twitter in the Kagurabachi community, let me know, okay? But the whole idea is, like, whenever he got shot by one of Sojo's techniques using Cloud Gouger, there actually wasn't any blood, so there's, like, a chance he could be, like, some Shikigami or some other weird thing created with sorcery, which would make sense to why he is still alive, right? And, of course, we know that these two work under Izami, and we just see this whole idea of the three different panels with three different, like, regimes in it, and, of course, we can guess at, like, the one of Ikuto, and I also like Ikuto's design because it looks like he's got a little bit of stubble on his chin now. It's a little bit of a funny thing, right? And Hajime to be under Izami, but then, like, who are these other people under, pretty much, right? And, like, everybody has their own, like, small unit underneath them. I just think that is pretty cool, right? But Kudo just continues to explain, saying, like, hey, nearly all of their forces are on site here currently, and beyond that, there's also more than 300 fighters who've completed our basic curriculum, right? Those are most of the guys you see walking around here carrying swords, pretty much, right? And we just see that Hakuri's like, oh, curriculum? And we get that same panel from earlier where he's just, like, looking all queasy over the idea of studying, pretty much. And Kudo just says, like, yes, intensive training in spirit energy and martial arts, plus sorcery fundamentals. I'd say they absorbed about a third of that library, which is very interesting to be a member of the Kamunabi. you need to have like a third of that library already under your belt. So it doesn't seem like too much more to also get the other 2/3 of that done to become like Masumi level, right? Super, super interesting stuff. I love this series, right? But at this point, we see that Hakuri and Kudo are walking into a few elevators, right? And it presumably looks like they are heading down. We don't get an exact idea, but of course we know that the Shinichi and the Sword Saint are further underground, so it seems like that they are working their way down there to, of course, transport those blades and the person out of there, or at least separate them a little bit, right? But the whole idea here is, we see that one of these guys, one of these, members of Swords, one of the Kamunabi, like, basic recruit people, or not basic recruit, what did he call them? Just, they're a basic fighter, right? One of them is in the elevator with them, right? As we see the Hakuri's like, whoa, what a strong group, right? And Kudo just is like, yes, they're all bound up rock solid in a force field, so nothing could be more secure, pretty much, right? And he just says like, hey, Azami and those guys aren't really protecting to fight the headquarters up there. It's more likely they went outside to hunt their prey, pretty much, right? And at this point, we get a little bit of, like, a conflict of interest, in my opinion. Or not really a conflict of interest, a conflict in who in the hell is currently talking. Because at this point, we get a close-up of Izami's face, right? We just see blood splatter everywhere, pretty much. And we really just get focused on Izami's eye that's not covered up by his hair, which is on the, the right side of his head. So we really get a look at his left eye. And we just get to words, pretty much, of like, no. Something seems off. The Shaku aren't using the Danseki like they did at the Sanzo. They operate very strategically. Even if their plans have gone haywire, would they actually show up knowing they're waltzing into a death trap? Huh. This is very interesting. Because on one hand, it could be like, okay, is this samurai guy summoning other, like, Hishaku guys in? Or not Hishaku, like, hired Hishaku hands to help them out? Like, it's a little bit of one of these weird things, like, who is actually saying this? Is this Kudo thinking all this in a moment, or is this Izami, whose face we were seeing in a moment? Either way, it's that same idea of, like, okay, why are they coming in here? Like, what is their true goal here, actually, right? But as we see, the elevator is, like I said, presumably heading down. We don't really know which way it's going, but we just see the elevator start to open, and this guy in here, whose name we will learn in a second, is Ichihira. Kudo and Hakuri are all here in the elevator, right? And we see that Ichihira says, like, oh, Mr. Kudo, it looks like things are getting busy out there, right? And Kudo says, like, oh, yes, Ichihira, Ichihira, my bad. He says, like, oh, Ichihira, you are correct, right? And he then just says to Hakuri, like, hey, Hakuri, this man right here, Ichihira, is one of our instructors, right? And Hakuri's like, hey, I'm very pleased to meet you, right? And Ichihira just says, like, oh, you're such a young one. He's like, hey, lately I've been training more and more students your age. Quite a lot of fresh sprouts showing up these days, right? And Kudo's like, yes, education is a crucial job. We're severely shorthanded these days, right? Our trainers are building the foundation that appears to address that issue, right? As Ichihira just says, like, hey, I have dedicated my life to saving this country. Man, it seems like this guy is starting to talk in death flags all of a sudden. I wonder what this could mean, right? As he just continues saying, like, yes, I fought in the war. And we just get a very big close-up of Hakuri's face and Ichihira's face after he says this, right? As we see that Ichihira rustles down into his shirt jacket's pocket, pretty much, and pulls out and says, like, oh, have a look at this. As he opens up a small little pendant, and he just says, like, hey, this is my daughter, Yuki. As we just see the image of a little girl here in the locket, and let me say, this girl looks correctly proportioned. Hokuzono, you finally drew a child with what seems to be normal proportions, right? I'm proud of you, Hokuzono, right? But Ichihira just is like, yes, she will be 4 this month. And Hakuri's like, oh, what a cutie, right? And pretty much Ichihira just is like, right, she scrunches up her whole face whenever she smiles, right? And he just says, like, I care about her even more than I care about this country. As we see that he puts the locket away, and then while he's in his jacket, he pulls out a knife out of his jacket. And he opens it up and holds the blade right next to his neck. And Kudo's like, oh, Ichihira, right? As we see that Ichihira goes through, slits his own neck. And we get this panel where we see the blood splatter go all over Hakuri's face. Of course, he has just now seen a second innocent person take their own life in front of him. As we see that Ichihira's body falls to the ground, and as it's falling, we see pine trees start to sprout out of all of his blood all over his face, and they all start to go every which way, looking towards to pinpoint and pierce both Hakuri and Kudo, right? And Kudo's like, hey, warrior's path! And he presses Hakuri. As Hakuri starts to fall through the floor, as Kudo just looks down and just is like, hey, don't worry about me. As we see all of a sudden, all of these pine trees start to sprout out all across this area. And of course, the sensory guy, or one of the various sensory, what did Kudo call all of them earlier? Just have like a more proper term for them. He says there's 7 practitioners on par with the Masumi. They trade off occupying the core station. He doesn't give them a proper name, though, but the main force field guy, right? We see that he's sitting in his pit of water, and we see that his pit of water starts to, like, strike up all these moments where we see all of these events are happening all around the Kabanagi headquarters, right? As we just see that he's like, hey, unregistered spirit energy explosion located at 4 locations in the force field, and we just see all of this happen as all of these pine trees are just exploding up everywhere, pretty much, right? And we see that Hakuri eventually lands on the ground right under wherever this elevator is, or right above. Kudo just pretty much, like, put himself in the way to let Hakuri get away, right? And we see laying on the ground besides Hakuri is Kudo's respirator mask thing, all bloodied, sitting beside him, right? And Hakuri sees it, he's like, oh, Mr. Kudo, he protected me, and as he looks up and sees all the pine tree sorcery, he's like, wait, why did it emerge from Mr. Ichihira's body? As we see that Hakuri even remembers all of the various times that the Shaku appeared at the Senkutsuji Temple, and he's like, oh, was it that guy pretty much, right? As he looks up and he's like, wait, like, where even is Kudo right now, right? As we see that Hakuri eventually opens up the elevator thing, and we see that 2 Kabanagi members are running towards him, right? And we see that they both have swords in their hands, and Hakuri's like, hey there, Mr. Kudo's above us, right? But we see both of these Kabanagi members come up, grab their swords, and pretty much pin them against the wall, or pin Hakuri against the wall using these 2 blades, right? And they're pretty much like, hey, do we kill him? And Hakuri's like, whoa, what are you 2 doing, right? And the other one just says like, hey, no, it was the idea to use him as bait to attract the core fighters, pretty much, right? And Hakuri's like, whoa, like, hold up, what are you saying, right? As one of these guys just says like, hey, I'm sorry, it's for our families, right? And Hakuri's eyes almost go blank. He's like, wait a second, families? That other guy was talking about his daughter. Like, wait, don't tell me. As we see probably the most chilling image of the chapter. As we see, of course, the Shaku member sitting inside some lounge of some kind. I don't know if this is like a coffee place or what it is, but we see it looks like he's got a small coffee cup on a plate, and he's got a bunch of names written down on a sheet of paper, on a notepad pretty much, right? And we see that he just says, he's talking on the phone to somebody, and he just says like, oh yes, for Ichihira, he did his part. You can release his daughter. As we see that he crosses Ichihira's name off his list. Oh my gosh, this was such a chilling moment to read in the second. I know this is going to sound really weird, because I don't think I've really said this too many times, but my family owns a farm, and pretty much we got out to the farm today, right at the time whenever these chapters drop for me on the East Coast, which is 11 a.m. currently, and I was sitting down getting ready to go through, and like we had to do the cucumber, squash, and zucchini harvest today, right? That's pretty much whenever it comes time for all of that to happen. That's something you have to harvest every 2 days, because like, hey, squash, zucchini, and cucumbers don't stop producing until the weekend whenever we sell at our regional farmers markets, so it's like we gotta keep picking it throughout the week, of course. And we were pretty much getting ready. I was sitting on a truck bed, getting ready to head out to the field. And in the meantime, the jump chapters had just came out. So I opened up my phone, and I'm sitting there. And I remember I'm sitting on the back of the truck bed, getting a ride out to the field while we're getting ready to go pick cucumber, squash, zucchini, all of those various things. And I just read this, and I'm like, what in the world? I hate this guy, the Hatshaku. I hope him a very nice die, pretty much, right? But it says very interesting things. We also see that he is crossed out 2 other names. Because, of course, as we just saw here a second ago, there was a few other, like, bloodshed and all of that. What did the sensory guy say? There were 4 other events happening all around the headquarters, right? And also, it seems like one of these happened in the room where all of the leaders sit, pretty much, because we see that sort of round table. So I'm guessing this wasn't one of the leaders who was, like, a traitor or something. I'm guessing this is just one of those guys who ran in and, like, used the ability there in the second, right? But the whole idea is that the Hatshaku just says, like, hey, now do your thing, soldiers. As we do just see a little bit of a background, it seems like he may be at a cafe or something. We aren't really quite sure, though. But it seems like all the pine tree sorcery is sort of just, like, riding up there on the ground level. So it seems like everybody may be evacuating and running around, and he's just sitting there doing his thing, pretty much, right? But Hakuri sort of has this whole idea of, like, oh, wait, hostages, like, what is all this going on, right? As we just see that these 2 Kamunabi members who are going after Hakuri, one of them just says, like, hey, we can't have him, like, flailing around here, like, we need to cut off all of his limbs, pretty much, right? But of course, Hakuri activates the Iso and Storehouse mask, pretty much, and just touches both of their blades and just transports them to his storehouse, pretty much, right? And he just says, like, okay then, but how will you 2 do it? Of course, if their swords completely disappear, the 2 of them react like, whoa, my sword! What has happened here, right? But Hakuri just says, like, hey, I have confiscated your weapons, so if you surrender. But as he's saying this, we see that one of these guys just, like, grabs Hakuri's head and pulls it down and brings his knee up and just knees Hakuri in the face as he's just like, alright, we'll knock him out! As we just see that Hakuri's like, oh gosh, as he just gets, like, kneed straight into the face, right? As we just get some narration, or not some narration, but just some thoughts from Hakuri thinking like, whoa, taking their swords didn't stop them. He's like, hey, now what am I supposed to do? There's no way that it's just these 3. Worst case scenario, the Hishaku have gotten to all of them, too, right? As, of course, Hakuri remembers Kudo earlier saying, like, hey, each of them directly commands their own elite troop, pretty much, right? As Hakuri just thinks, like, hey, the attack upstairs is just a diversion to lure out the strongest fighters. At the same time, they're provoking all the weak in fighting, right? As Hakuri's like, hey, I need to teleport to Shinuchi. I am the only one who can stop this, right? As he's like, gah. As Hakuri's like, God, this is no time to be. He's just thinking, like, wait a second. Somehow, as these 2 guys are like, wait, why are our blows affecting him, right? As you get a little bit of narration saying, hey, the 2 soldiers trained for 5 years in the Kamunabi's intensive physical fortification program. Well, Hakuri was toughened up by a decade of bottomless love from the eldest son of the Sazanami clan. Of course, remembering all the pain and abuse that Hakuri has gone through at the hands of Soya. As Hakuri just thinks like, hey, I'm sorry, as he holds out his hands and uses an Iso and fires both of these 2 sorcerers straight into the wall and knocks both of them out. As we see Hakuri just thinking like, hey, maybe the pine tree can't grow out of their bodies if they're unconscious. As we see that Hakuri's just like, whew, okay, then he's like, hey, from now on, there's no knowing who's an enemy or who's an ally. But that's right. I can fight now. If the Sword Saint and the Shinuchi fall into their hands, this nation is done for. He's like, hey, Chihiro is also out there fighting. And he just thinks like, hey, I'm one of the core fighters too. And that's where we end off this chapter. Chapter number 80 of Kagurabachi. I love this chapter. I thought this was just an awesome experience all the way through. I mean, hey, it's chapter number 80. It's a Hakuri chapter, and it's one of these chapters where we get all of the main character traits of Hakuri. We see how he's sort of like this weird weak fish whenever it comes to studying, and he's running around with Kudo, and eventually Kudo sort of seems like he has to self-sacrifice himself to protect, of course, Hakuri here in a moment. And then Hakuri runs into these other guys, and we get this whole idea of like, hey, it's hostages situation. They're trying to protect their own families by working with the Shaku here in the moment. And legitimately, it seems like the Shaku are doing an alright thing, and they're not trying to kill everybody, right? They're legitimately, it seems like he let this guy, or Ichihara's daughter, go after Ichihara pretty much pulled off his move. Which is just a very interesting thing. I'm like, yes, they do seem like evil people, but again, they're doing all of this for the region of stopping the malediction on, of course, the island out there where the Seitai War occurred. So it's really this whole idea where, yes, are they terrible people? Yes. Are they murderers? Yes. But of course, they're trying to do this for a good reason, which, at the end of the day, is such an awesome sort of, like, sitting down here and like, whoa, that's a cool character development, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I just loved all the Hakuri stuff we got in this chapter. I thought it was just really awesome from beginning to end. Of course, we have that little bit of a weird moment where it's this whole idea of like, okay, is Izami talking here, or is this the other guy? And hey, we also learned Ichiki's name in this chapter, which, hey, at this rate, last chapter we learned Kudo's name, this chapter we learned Ichiki's name, and what, there's like 7 other Kabanagi leaders to get through or something, so maybe just slightly, here by like chapter number 87, we'll have all the names of the Kabanagi upper echelon, right? Hey, a boy can dream, can he not, right? But yeah, this is just a really good chapter, and I came out of this chapter just really, really liking Kudo as a character. I thought he had a lot of really awesome moments here. And again, I have really thought that Kudo has been the traitor for a while, but also seeing here how he sort of goes and how he reacts to Ichiki sort of like slitting his own neck and all of this various stuff, and like how he protects Hakuri. I'm just very interested in how he is. And of course, spoilers for, of course, Bleach here, the Bleach anime and the Bleach manga. If you've not read it, you definitely should, but spoilers coming up for it, right? We could be doing the whole ploy here of like, oh wow, you remember who seemed like a very good guy and then ended up sort of like faking and their suicide and all of that, or their death pretty much? Yes, Sosuke Aizen. So it's like, could Kudo be like one of these Aizen sort of like spin-off things where it's like, oh yeah, it seems like he may be dead, only for him to come back whenever Hakuri ends up fulfilling his mission and saying like, hey, I'm sorry, I was actually working for the enemy the entire way along. It's just very interesting, but at the same time, I don't want to believe that, because I also just really like Kudo in general, so it's like, yeah, I wonder what's going to go on here. Kudo is not dead, I can tell you that for that much, but yeah, just really interesting, and I can't wait to see where we go next time in good old Kagurabachi. So yeah, if you guys did like this video on Kagurabachi chapter number 80, I have talked about Kagurabachi plenty of other times. I started talking about this wonderful series at chapter number 44, and have made a chapter on every video since, of course, chapter number 44. So if you want to see any of my thoughts on those, of course, there'll be a post link down in the description box of this video, and also on the end card of this video. Also, I also cover plenty of other anime and manga related content in general, so like as I mentioned, I read a lot of Shonen Jump, and I do a Shonen Jump podcast that can be found on podcasting platforms, and also just at my YouTube channel, at Glowplasma, so go check out that. And hey, if you guys did enjoy this video, I don't normally ask for this sort of thing, but maybe you would consider subscribing to the channel. I always like seeing my ego number go up whenever I make these videos, and that's always just a fun time of day, so yeah. Really follow that out of the way. Thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Kagurabachi chapter number 80. Again, this chapter was titled Secret Room, which I don't know if that's talking about the library or what, but Kagurabachi chapter titles are never the most inspired. But yeah, follow that out of the way. Thank you guys so very much for watching, and I will catch you Bachi Bros next time for chapter number 81. Again, this was chapter number 80, and I'll catch you guys next time. This will be Glowplasma 231, the Hakuri Lover, signing out.